There we go.
And could somebody take notes as well? Or could we make sure that notes get taken?
I'll try and do my best on the notes.
Cheers. Cool. So me and David met a little while ago and looked at an agenda. We're suggesting that we have a quick update on the scheme proposals off the back of the working group on that. We have some questions about APIs and API specifications that I think this group should be well placed to engage with. A couple of questions about tooling, and probably not for this group, although given the people who are actually here, maybe, although there's rabbit holes galore. Schema languages, we'd like to, as we start to think about what we do next, there's questions about schema languages we want to try and answer, and technical implementation of extensions and profiles and how we actually go about putting that into practice. We'd like to see if we can establish just small groups to meet and look at those. That'll probably involve people who aren't here. So ideas of who from organisations or who we should talk to about that to get a decent range of views and get something sorted out. And then we have a parks topics list to look at, see if there's anything in particular from that we want to get up to the forum. And I think that's going to be us. Is there anything on there, or is there anything not on there that people think we should be talking about, or anything on there that people think is out of scope or that we shouldn't be looking at all? Cool.
One thing I'd add is just communication tools, how we incorporate the forum into the group process. If there are other things, it would be nice to hear how people feel about that.
Cool. I'll put that in just before we get onto the parks topics then. That seems to be relevant. Brilliant. So I'm hoping Mike or Devin, you'll be able to give us a brief update on how the scheme update's going from your perspective. And then me and David can say a little bit about what we expect to happen next.
Yeah, and Devin may want to chip in. As far as I'm concerned, I think we are there now. We annotated in the spreadsheet latest tab. We have the recommendation, and we kind of updated that very slightly following a 1.5 hour discussion on Friday. And I think we're ready to kind of hand that over to you to go through with a fine-tooth comb and have a look at. I mean, I'd be keen to get, and I can ask a colleague to do it if you can't, I'd be keen to get a JSON table representation of what we've agreed, so I could run it through a few tools and so it looks like what I think we've agreed. And that's just a manual exercise, I think. The only big thing I think were the big decision we made that we've probably not made before was to deprecate the meta table description table. And Greg and others was going to go away and find out if anyone actually used or cared about that. But otherwise, I think we're there pending, you know, you formalizing it and us just checking what that looks like. Devin?
Yep, I agree. Nothing to contribute beyond. I agree.
Brilliant. So from my perspective, what I'm supposed to happen next is we'll then take that and do a run through of it. Like we've been engaged with it, we've left some comments already, but give some more detailed thoughts to what's it's actually going to be like to implement. Hopefully we'll be able to get a JSON table representation of that in place. But the question around schema languages, so we're never not going to have a JSON table version of the schema where it's primacy. I think we want to talk about, and that'll have impacts across what features it supports and so on. So yeah, that was something for us to, I'm expecting us to have a bunch of back and forth. We'll respond to things and we will no doubt have further questions for people who contributed. And as we try and actually make things happen, we will no doubt come across things that we go, we don't know how to resolve this. So we'll bring that back to people to to work out. Yeah, I think we're in a good place. David, do you want to say anything about that process?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything too problematic about. I think it's all fine. I've gone through it and I'm fairly confident that we can do a better job of going through it. But yeah, the only stuff in the proposal document that isn't really settled is the extension profiling mechanism, which would probably is this a separate topic that we covered, Rob, or
it is, yeah, we'll come on to that.
Yeah, so apart from that, I don't think there's any. My biggest worries I've already put in the doc and they've all been looked at, so I'm happy. So I think we may get a few more people at Open Data Services to look at it and see if there's anything that stands out, like from like other standards that we've worked on that seems a bit odd. We could provide that kind of feedback, but hopefully I don't. Yeah, I personally can't see any other major concerns with that.
So there's no reason not to talk about extensions and profiles next. So one thing that is yet undefined is the actual technical mechanism by which we codify what the difference is between a particular implementation or profile or extension or version, whatever you want to call it, of HSDS is and base HSDS. And coming from that are some related discussions around the composition of the core standard or standards. We already have core tables and a full version of HSDS. We talked on Friday about the possibility of a best practices version of HSDS with certain things that we don't want to change for compatibility in the core spec, left in place, but with them very rapidly overridden to say, here's how we think this should be done. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of interesting conversations there. There's also technical conversations around, do we use JSON merge patch? Do we use Jolt? Do we use, yeah, there are many technologies that support this. Choosing one will have implications. I don't suggest we talk about that now. I suspect that a lot of the people that would contribute well to that conversation aren't here. But I would like to hear who should we get into that conversation. Our plan being that we'll have one, possibly two calls to build on what we've already talked about in the forum and to make some recommendations to explore so we have a better understanding of the domain. And obviously we'll make sure we write things down so we're not just going off and making decisions about stuff in the dark.
I'd very much like to be involved in that and would like to involve my colleague Dom. You'll see in the tooling document I've linked to a prototype tool that we knocked up for generating an application profile from a full extended tabular data package, which we're kind of seeing as a starting point and a talking point. It doesn't address things like adding encoding schemes or specifying particular taxonomies, but it does the basics. And I'd just like to talk about it when we get to such a meeting, please.
That makes sense, but as far as I understand, that tool generates like a full new data package.json, like a subset, and it doesn't sort of express the differences between the main one and the subset. Is that right? As far as I understand, it was like it just gives you a full new version of it, and I think that's good. Maybe that's the way we're going, but we haven't agreed. I don't know if we've agreed.
we need to talk through it. I mean, it's not, if you reload it into the system, it's obvious visually what the differences are because they're the things that are not ticked. But there would easily be a machine readable way of generating differences if you cared. And yeah, I'm keen that everything, whether it's an application profile or it's the core full extended scope, is a tabular data package. because all of our other tools run off a tabular data package, and it would be strange to have, you know, one set of tools that runs from a tabular data package and another set of tools that runs from a completely different format for application profiles, which are subsets of tabular data packages. But I should probably not say any more because Rob wants a separate meeting on that.
Yeah. I've got lots to say on that as well, so I'm going to be quiet as well.
Hence why. Anyone else want to get in on that, or is this going to be a Purism Open Data Services conversation? Skylar, you in?
Yep.
Cool. And yeah, is there anyone else that we think isn't here but we know about who would have a view on that? I mean, it's not all going to be decided. It's just there's a bunch of stuff to be thrashed out. Cool. So let's do schemas next. So I want to get that done before APIs. So yeah, schema languages. There's HSDS started life as a bulk interchange format, and so JSON table schema makes complete sense for that. It also started life quite a long time ago, before a lot of modern development on JSON schema had happened, and there's been a lot less development on JSON table schema. We're now using HSDS in lots of new and interesting ways, and partially there's an open data services preference here in that we've spent a lot of time working and building tools around JSON schema that we like and can bring to bear very quickly on anything that we work on, but also it allows greater expressiveness in lots of ways. But also there are, as Mike says, there's obviously some tooling that uses table schema. It's something that does map very nicely, very quickly to databases and so on. And yeah, I think we want to explore what the role of each of the schema languages might be, what the interaction of those with things like validation, application profiles, existing tooling, other possible serializations of the standard would be. And yes, much like extensions of profiles, I think one or two calls will make a lot of progress around that, but one or two calls with not many people. So yeah, same question. Who wants in on that one?
Is it okay to go to all of them? I'm interested.
Yeah.
Again, I or my colleague Dom would like to be involved, but I do think it's important that we have people, possibly less technical people sometimes, who are used to working in tables, like in spreadsheets and in relational databases, because once we swap to JSON formats, we might be talking about, you know, tiny little classes, which, and if like, you know, a separate class for gender with half a dozen entries, and that would be a completely different table in a relational database, and we could end up with hundreds of tables in a relational database. Whereas if we convert what is a JSON schema format with lots of nice classes into a tabular structure. So I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but I think if we've got people that rely on things like Airtable, they need to be represented.
Sure, and where we're coming from on this, like my reference point for this is 360 Giving, which is most people who use 360 Giving have never heard of JSON and should never have to hear about JSON. They manipulate, they work entirely in spreadsheets, but behind the scenes, our tooling converts anything you upload to JSON, does a bunch of JSON schema validation and JSON-based testing, and then, depending on what you're trying to do, may well convert it back again. If we've done some conversion or something in there. So yes, you're absolutely right, Mike, and I've got that in mind.
What's the choice here then? Is there a choice or a question?
Yeah, so what I think it will come down to I don't want to preempt the conversation too much, but what I expect it to come down to is, do we make a JSON schema from which we then generate a JSON table schema for use in tabular applications? Or do we not do that? And do we continue to use JSON table schema as the origin, source of truth, canonical schema language, canonical schema for HSDS?
Does anyone want to do 2 and not 1?
Yes,
You want to do 2?
certain things can only be expressed in JSON schema. It's more flexible than tabular, but tabular
Isn't
can
that
be
one-
generated from JSON schema. So that's
Right.
That's,
So isn't that's option 1? Option 1 would be, right, JSON schema, and then generating the tabular from that.
yeah.
I mean, it's also possible the other way around theoretically as well, to get the table schema, which is what the API spec is sort of doing anyway. So you can, but that way I feel I'm not convinced. I've never done it that way before. I've done it the other way before, and I know OpenFerrell UK are doing it the other way, and so there is a question around the right way.
Yeah,
We
you see,
can-
Open
that's
Referral
everything.
UK started with what Open Referral left. It wasn't necessarily a positive decision in that direction. So, we need to have that discussion, and we may now be able to review the whole landscape. But I'm just saying, people need to understand what that means in terms of going to tables. I mean, Ian, for instance, who's on this call, he and his colleagues are forever using an export to Google spreadsheet of standard API feeds. And, Rob's just said he can represent that. We need to understand how that would look like with people that consume spreadsheets with multiple tabs.
And to answer Devin's question, I suspect no one wants option 2. So the question is how we do, and the topic of discussion would be the how of option 1, because there are many undefined, there are many options, many choices in actually implementing it.
And what we're looking at is, we're going to have this in JSON schema. We're going to generate a tabular JSON schema out of that JSON schema, and that tabular JSON schema will basically will result in or be a data package plus a bunch of CSVs.
Yep.
And that's how it'll work. Yeah, I mean, I think that certainly makes sense to me.
And yeah, the conversation I expect will touch on issues like how far are we willing to constrain our JSON schema for the sake of being able to convert it to a table, and things like that, which are useful and interesting. And of course, they have tooling implications. That is for that. So Devin, do you want in on that conversation, or are you happy to leave it to Poise MoJC and Connect 211?
Yeah, no, I don't think I have any opinions.
Brilliant.
To contribute.
So on to APIs. This is one that this is on the fence when me and David put together the agenda. But we didn't want to start 3 work groups for people to go to. So let's talk about something here rather than just who's going to go to other meetings. First question. Do we need to couple an API spec upgrade with the HSDS upgrade? Or can we upgrade the HSDS, the bulk interchange format, and then think about API spec? Discuss.
I vote for the latter.
I'd hate. I don't think they need be sequential. So I could envisage overlap, and I certainly don't want the API one held up, because the API is all I care about, but understand that the HSDA needs to come first.
I mean, I feel like they should come together, but also wouldn't want to hold up the HSDS, like, you know, any longer.
Yeah, agreed.
Not where I'm at.
Facilitating calls is much easier when everyone just agrees with each other all the time. It's great. I'm actually going to move that point to later. So when we talk about it, there's a question in my mind of how far there is overlap between the need for a query API, such as Open Referral has, or what I'm going to call Open Referral UK's API a query API. This might be unfair, but it is fundamentally, as I understand it, for querying and getting back small numbers of services that meet certain criteria. And I'm going to contrast that with the bulk transfer API, which is a way of moving either the entirety of a database or the delta between what you last got and the current state of the database. I know that that's something of a false dichotomy, but they are two quite distinct use cases. And I'd be interested to understand the focus that we think we should take within the Open Referral specifications, the degree to which the dichotomy makes sense given how we use this data, and how this might interact with how we intend to use profiles, extensions, etc. Particularly given that, and this is an assumption that I haven't tested, I think the taxonomies in use in different contexts are the main discriminator that define that context. That was poorly expressed, but hopefully you understand what I mean. And if not, I'll try and say some different words that mean the same thing.
I think it's a kind of false dichotomy in that, yeah, I mean, you can use methods to list services or organizations, and yeah, you can retrieve a subset if you apply parameters that filter those, but if you don't, you get the lot. And that's fine so long as getting the lot every time is sufficient for your use case. And I don't think we've yet seen the full US use case for transferring a whole database. We have some use cases here for aggregating across multiple databases. And people like Ian might want to comment as to whether or not they see it as feasible as reading the whole database each time. Otherwise, we're potentially just looking at adding extra filter parameters, which says, give me everything that's changed from a particular time. Now, I know that's easier said than done, but I'm not sure it's a complete difference. And I'd hate to see, you know, a completely different set of web methods for different use cases. There may be a dump database method, which I think somebody did mention, but by all means, if we've got a use case for that, we can scope it.
I would have to say that the main focus is just on the query APIs. From what I can tell, most of the bulk import-export utility would be primarily on the US side. And as much as I would like to think that there's an easy way to be swapping data around, there really isn't. And it invariably comes down to the specifics of each implementation. And so I'm not sure that we've actually used the same methodology for any one of the 6 states that we're bulk like importing right now. It's had to be kind of unique to everybody. So a bulk API for me would really just be a convenience for developers where you say, if you're transferring by API, here's a shape that's a little easier that pulls in more of the related fields at one time. But it's that's just a convenient step, not essential. Mike has pointed out we could grab that just from services, and David pointed out in an email chain earlier some great methodologies for doing that. So, I mean, you know, we could work with it just from there. But this, I'm thinking this.
Yeah, my take is that that I would not prioritize bulk transfer features, because I also kind of feel like thinking about like the type of world that we want, which is maybe out of scope for this conversation, but like, do we really want a world where people are constantly downloading an entire like database? Ideally, that should be like a kind of a one-off thing, very occasionally, and a convenience factor. But like, you know, you can still get all the data you need to through the normal querying. If you do want to do it in bulk, you can just set up a running job. And like maybe if there's a high demand for doing something like downloading a zip file of it all or doing a DB dump, then like maybe in the future could do. But I mean, I also just kind of feel like the whole point of doing this is to promote interoperability and querying across nodes. And if we like facilitate ways to get around that, then we're kind of undermining some of the goal of interoperability, in my opinion.
People keep agreeing with each other. It's great.
Yeah, from my perspective, I'm happy to have it as one thing as well and not prioritize the bulk. As I said in that email thread, like an endpoint that gave you like all the IDs and the change dates would be good, even though it's not the whole data, it's just so you can because some systems are never going to be able to do more complicated streaming change stuff, and like giving a low barrier to say, okay, this is a service and this is when it was updated last, and if you just have to download all of that, it's a manageable size of things, not all the extra data as well. So that's what I'd like. So instead of having like a special bulk endpoint, having something sort of simple and simple like that as part of the API spec would be good.
I do really like that, by the way. I feel like it wouldn't get used a ton, but when it gets used, people are going to love it. That stripped down API endpoint. Yeah, I like that.
I mean, I think it would be nice to have. We do move data sets around relatively frequently for a few different use cases, including some that I didn't expect. So I mean, what like a instructions for how to represent the entire database, I think would be useful, and I think that what we've used in the past is the HSDA zip file or the HSDS zip file, which is like a data package packaged up as a zip file, with all the CSVs. That's kind of been the mode that we've used for this bulk data moving. But I think something that would allow us to just have an API that would just extract the whole thing would be very useful.
I don't know.
And
if
I'd imagine.
Go ahead.
And I'd imagine it kind of operating at like an organization by organization kind of level, where it's like, this is the organization, this is all the data related to that organization, and that JSON pack, and then just serialized.
The neatest thing I heard recently came from you guys across the pond, and it was an endpoint that returns it as JSON or CSV. And I was like, ooh, now that would be fun. I like that.
Yeah, that's kind of standard with some of our APIs. I mean, some of this might be conditional on the discussion we have as to whether the source of truth is a tabular data package or JSON, because we could represent it all in JSON. But equally well, if we've got filtered web methods, and we say there's a get services with organization identifier, then you've got all the services for one organization. Open Data Services are familiar with Open Active, and the only standard there is you can just take the delta changes from day one, and I would not recommend that approach. So that unless you start at day one, you can't build the database, and you've got to go through every change since. It's fine if you're maintaining the whole lot, but we need some way of just dipping in.
I enjoyed Howard's face palm at that, because yes, that is a long discussed and much contentious issue in open active world.
I wonder if that solution Devin mentioned there, there's the IDs in the last update, if it's a shortcut. But anyway, but that's somewhere else.
Steering committee is on Thursday.
I mean, the big question I've got is like, can we produce like a JSON that service endpoint that's got everything in it? Is it possible? I don't even know whether it's theoretically possible. Mike may have a better idea because you've sort of done it.
Well, I mean, we don't do it. I mean, we say if you can get a list of services with basic information, or you can get an individual service with all the information. So if you want the whole database, you just cycle through every service. And, you know, I consider that feasible, both in terms of, you know, performance, and also in terms of, you know, not putting a load on the server, given that we're talking completely open APIs with, obviously you can put some throttling on the server, but no other restrictions on access to the data. So, you know, if somebody's asking every 5 minutes for the entire database in JSON, you're going to be.
Oh, yeah, I didn't mean that. I meant for a single, even for a single service, like a way to get out, to branch out throughout the whole tree of HSDS to get something that is like where you don't have to then link out to other things. I don't know. I haven't tried it, but you're saying that's possible.
We do that. I'm slightly nervous that we constrain the current HSDS 1 or 2, I think it was 1 we constrained, such that we say things like a contact will always belong to a service, and other things will always belong to a service. It won't belong to an organization or a location. So things do branch out nicely from a service, and they'll be a bit more ragged if they can come from multiple places. And I could see the code being more difficult, but it still should work. Obviously, you've got to make sure you don't get into a loop.
Yeah, but your code, the current, so with the JSON schema that we end up with, if we're having a JSON schema version, which I think we do need for an API spec, essentially for the service, needs to do that for everyone. We need to make that, and I think it's possible as well, but I wasn't 100% sure.
I mean, we only recommended a core set of, you know, limited number of web methods, you know, services, organizations, service app location, taxonomy terms, not much beyond that. So we only need JSON schemas for those things, but obviously they're quite complicated for the whole of service, for the whole organization.
Cool. So what I'm expecting after this is that after we've talked about schema languages, we'll take what we talked about here and previous discussions, and we open data services will come back with a more concrete proposal about what we think the open referral API spec should be, and then you can tell us whether you love it or hate it and edit it and take it further from there. Is that what everyone else is expecting us to do?
Yeah, but can you build that with reference to POR 11328, which Shelby kindly went through earlier today, and that is what we've been working on so far?
Yeah, I assumed we'll build off that document.
Cool. I'm not sure I've looked at that, or if I have, I've forgotten what's in it. But as long as it's
It
in
may
there,
have been while you, because there's been quite a lot of work on that since you were away, Rob. So this kind of these discussions have been discussed, but I still don't think the discussion about what endpoints there are has been discussed. I don't think it's been, but there's a few things that maybe I would like to add or take away from that potentially, but I don't know if that's a discussion for now. Like I said, I'd like to add that ID date thing, but I would also the intermediary, not full representation, where you're just doing the one-to-one relationships like Open Referral UK do. The many-to-one or the one-to-ones is like what you do when you're looking at that as like the basic version when you're looking at a particular endpoint, which then gets converted to a CSV. I mean, I don't know. I mean, for me, I don't know how useful that is, because it's like an arbitrary decision about where you want to go out from like the basic representation. I'm happy. I just think that needs some discussion, but that everybody's actually happy with that as the representation.
Yeah, I just think we need to agree on the rules, so those rules will apply equally well to an application profile as they do to the full spec. We don't want lots of exceptions.
Oh no, I understand that. That's what the HSDA had lots of. That was the problem. I thought with HSDA, that there was like, it got changed quite a lot of exceptions. So I agree that you need like a mechanistic way of determining what the output should be. But it's like I understand from open proposal why that's a good one, why that's what you've chosen, but I don't know whether that everybody will agree that it needs to be just that for their API endpoint. There could be some that want a bit more, and some, so we have to I don't know how easy that's possibly going to degree. I agree that we need like a representation that is like the whole of a service, one definitely, and a one where we've got the updates, but what we need in the middle, and about what kind of data that we can request, what subset of data we can request. Do we need anything around that at all, or are we then sort of implementing sort of GraphQL or something? We don't really want to do that either, which is one option. But yeah, so for me, I'm keen on the full one and the very ridiculously narrow one, but the stuff in between, I'm not sure what the use cases and why people want that, what the use cases are for the middle one.
Cool. Absent much more of it on that. I bumped communication tools up the list. So Devin, did you have anything more to ask here other than should we just use the forum?
I think use it. Yeah, I mean, we've got a bunch of you've identified a bunch of like kind of areas of conversation. I wonder if it's worth trying to negotiate this stuff, on the forum, through posts. How that relates to like proposed future calls.
This is Greg. We had talked about at the very least, going through the list of parking lotted issues and seeing like who will take which issue to the forum in a post that describes the issue, maybe ask some questions or what have you. So I agree we should be, I still am not clear on how we want the discourse forum to relate to the GitHub issues queue. Maybe we just need like, an informal or assigned process of monitoring the issues queue and bringing stuff back into the forum as appropriate. But yes, I do encourage us to start thinking about how to take issues that we've identified here and socialize them with the broader network, which not all of the network is on the forum, but if somebody puts a post on the forum, I'm then able to share that post with other people who might have a perspective on it. So we might want to look through that list of park topics and see, which of the people here might want to take any of the priorities and start a thread on our behalf.
Yeah, I'm seeing the forum as more talking around an issue rather than specifics like you've got the wrong data type for this field, which would be fine on the forum, but equally well would fit in GitHub. As well as the parks topics, which kind of related to HSDS, I think the things that Rob's introduced before, on which we've said we need separate meetings, or the API where I guess David's going to kick it off. I kind of think each of those is a separate thread. Maybe linking to a document and just giving an introduction to what the issues are, and then people could talk through the issues there. I mean, there's that, and there's comments in the document, but sometimes comments can lead to a whole philosophical discussion, which would better fit in threaded forum.
Yeah, like a lot of this, I agree both with the GitHub is for like field-based specification issues, naturally that I think is where it'll tend to, and also that any of these buckets of discussion, I think it would be great to have a representation of them on the forum, so people can, I mean, for all the reasons why asynchronous communication is great, more people can, as a reference, more people can contribute who aren't, available on calls or aren't plugged in. Some people think better through writing, etc.
So certainly the couple of calls we've talked about setting up today are intended to be to shortcut a lot of forum posting to get agreement between people who probably actually already agree, but to work out the details of that. I'm just catching up with the parked issues spreadsheet. The people, I think your name was people who put them in here, as one of them has my name next to it. Two of them have my name next to them. Greg, you talked about someone taking these to the forum. Is that also what we committed to do when we put our names by them? Do we just need to prompt people to do that?
The people who put their names by it did not necessarily commit to do it, but I would start with them and saying, like, would you be interested in writing this up and posting it to the forum? And if there's any issue that is a priority, but nobody wants to touch it, point me to it and I'll see if I'm, if I feel comfortable describing the issue and opening a thread.
I think that can be taken off. I raised that and I'm taking it off now because we pretty well settled that on the last call, actually.
I mean, the buckets in the spreadsheet through the process, are really, I think are for reference for people who brought up issues, and if they want to start a post, then a thread, that'd be great. But I don't think we need to. I think it'd be nice to invite them at some point, but also that's kind of HSDS related, and I think we've kind of codified HSDS, or we're in the codification process on the HSDS side. So, any kind of insights that come from that are looking at 3.1 updates, not 3.0 updates. But for things related to the API, or for people who want to talk about 3.1, which I think is great for people to do, the forums a good venue for that. I certainly understand and have been on forums where like things get overly get kind of discussed in an inefficient way, but I also think that I've also seen a lot of docs come and go, and calls get lost, and so I think there's documentation benefits, and also like contribution, getting contributions from people, and engagement that forum posts do enable. So it's it's a double-edged sword, certainly.
Yeah, I agree with Devin. Most of those park topics are 3.01 or beyond. In the notes that I made on our full review of the spreadsheet, I did include section 4 of that notes document. I put a summary of what we meant by each park topic, which might be useful as a reminder if the 1 or 2 words no longer mean anything to people.
Cool. And that takes us quite neatly onto tooling. And I'm trying to remember what we need to talk about. We have the sort of stock take of existing tooling. So that had been done as part of this process. For us, open data services, we have a job to go through that and add a bit more detail, give some thought to the tooling ecosystem and what does it look like? How does it all interact? Who's responsible for things? How sustainable is that? If we maintain something, how does it get maintained, similarly for Purism and others, and giving a bit of thought to things like languages and their applicability currently to everything versus application profiles, all that kind of stuff. Is there anything else that anyone was expecting from that? Was there anything about tooling that anyone wants to raise right now about this?
Me again, if I can. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think with tooling, we need to look at the maintainability and sustainability of tooling. And I think the UK will be relying on certain tools, and I think it's reasonable if bits in the UK are funded that they could fund that. We certainly need to make sure they're there. For instance, if we tell someone commissioning a system that it's got to have an API feed that goes through the validator, we know that we've got to know that the validator is going to be there and up to date. I only care about tools that run from compliant API endpoints, but I think there's a set. I've yet to understand the extent to which tools which people are required to download and install locally and run locally are used and what purpose they serve. Now, that could just be that I don't really understand Open Referral US enough, but would quite like to understand how they're used, so I've got a whole picture if such tools exist and they genuinely are used a lot.
No, I think you've hit on it. What's really useful is a standard. What hasn't been used much is any specific tooling, as near as I can tell. Craig may know of some more expansive situations where, like, the validator's been used, but I think it hasn't been a great deal.
I don't think validator or the transformer definitely hasn't been used that I'm aware of. At least the one that's hosted, and then the validator, I think symbolic use only is my understanding.
I mean, it's been important for us to have had these things, but I can't confirm that they're being, like, I know that they've been used here or there, but I can't. I'd want to ask around more thoroughly. I don't know, like, if there were a compelling proposal to rebuild any of these tools rather than just update to accord with the new spec. We should socialize that around and see if we get any unexpected opinions. But I think we can go back to the drawing board. I think if we want to.
The issue is that they're not useful in isolation. They have to be a part of a workflow or a process. And there is no standard workflow or process. So therefore, they haven't been really adopted into much. That may change with time. I mean, we have a couple of projects going which could give people a process, right? But barring that, it's, any individual implementation is going to be, I keep beating this drum, but it's going to be specific. It's going to be unique to itself.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment wholeheartedly. If people were validating data packages because they wanted to move between one software product and another software product, and they wanted to make sure that their data was organized properly, or they wanted to adopt a software product because it's what, then the validator becomes like really useful. But without that, I think the tool chain, what gets me really excited about the OR UK work has been kind of that tool chain, which delivers like a lot of options in terms of how one wants to use formatted wants to use data.
Cool, that's really helpful. So go for it, Skylar. So that just leaves us the agenda for the next workgroup meeting. We are next meeting in 2 weeks. Is there anything in particular people want to talk about then, or want to have progressed on by then? If not, then I'm certain Greg will come up with things.
I mean, I guess I was thinking that each of the first things we started off with, firstly HSDS itself, and then what the other groups are working on, we kind of get to a précis of their conclusions to go through the full work group.
Did we pretty well decide then that we're going to drop 3.0 HSDS and then later we're going to drop the API specification?
We say they're in that order, but the development might overlap.
Yeah, that's good. Well, that's significant. And I think that some of what we'll be meeting with next, just continuing to clamp down on 3.0 so it can be, actually released. I'm very excited that that will be released this year. I have a few different projects I'd like to do in that already. And yeah.
Yeah, with the API spec, I think we can certainly aim to get them out alongside each other. But I guess what I was keen to understand was whether we had to make sure they were released exactly at the same time, or whether, as Mike says, it's okay for them to overlap. And I would say we may well do them at exactly the same time. Just depends how complicated each one is.
Mike, we're more or less using your API specifications just with the updated schema. Is that correct?
So far, but David might have views on that. And Shelby's come up with some very sensible improvements to kind of tidy it up a bit as well, which I think we ought to take advantage of while we're doing that update.
Gotcha. Okay.
Is it fair to say that we could release or like kind of indicate like how far can we get on HSDS before? I think there's some level of HSDS completeness that doesn't need to be 100%, but needs to be further along than we are now. That would be, immediately useful for, for our various projects. Certainly, I think for our projects, where if it was like, okay, we have a release candidate that's kind of done up, properly, but doesn't actually get released until, final API decisions are made, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I think that'd be good. I guess, is that doable? Can we basically do HSDS first and then do the API? Yeah. So like what level of done can we get to HSDS before we need to kind of switch over to the API?
I think the two will inform each other. But I would be uncomfortable if we were suggesting completely finishing HSDS before starting the API. But I think some of the conversations, especially around schema languages, speak more to the API development than the HSDS development, but have HSDS implications.
I mean, if we're looking at a tabular data package representation of HSDS 3.0, I can give you one of what we originally proposed, and it just needs a bit of Java, JSON editing for, a day max of somebody that knows what sure he is doing in front of a screen to make that, match what we've recommended, and then, we can run tools off that in a kind of dev environment for people to look at and see what the documentation looks like and what an entity diagram looks like, and just spot any obvious errors. But that's got to be 99% there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that'd be extremely useful. Anything that brings us more into kind of prototype, being able to prototype the stuff and see how the various tools work, around the decisions that we made, which have been significant on the HSDS side, just in terms of, tables are gone, tables are reorganized, all that stuff. That would certainly allow us, as an implementer, I would certainly feel comfortable, putting together next versions of my software around, which are really just concerned with the fields, kind of like getting that, these are not like data architecture big data flow issues. You know, these are more like, how do I want to see how this could impact, you know, just you know, my representation of data, you know, get my clients kind of onto like a 3.0, into a 3.0 environment, you know, getting 90% of the way there, being able to play with that, you know, is definitely super useful.
Agreed.
Cool. And that takes us very neatly to our hour. Cool. Thank you very much, everyone. See you in a couple of weeks.